Good evening, persons of quality, and I think this is an important opportunity for us here at the end of our particular term. So we're going to take a look at the poem Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas. So this is certainly something we want to look towards the final exam for. We want to make sure that we have a good understanding of how the poem works. So a lot of poetry this term in particular. So we know that learning to read and understand poetry has been tricky. We spent a ton of time on it, and the language gets tough. It's a lot of really crazy stuff for us to look at. And we have a large number of these that we've been working on. So, first of all, the terminology is tough. It can be complicated, especially to make sure you have the information, keeping your ideas nice and straight. It's also tough because as you take exams and you're held more and more accountable for how you can interpret poetry and how you link material. Specifically saying that because this is on your exam. We've got to make sure that we have ourselves organized. So this process is taking a look at Dylan Thomas's Do Not Go Gentle. And it's really one of the most famous poems of the 20th century. Now, you're going to see sometimes that my line of vision is going off to my left. It's just because my notes are over here, my camera screen is here, and then the camera itself is right here. So it gives us a very skewed sense of what we're trying to do. But that's okay. You'll be fine even if my vision is off in a different direction. Sometimes it's how I feel when eyes are on the clock and all those kinds of things as we're talking. But that's all right. So Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night is one of the most famous 20th century British poems. So we're going to take a look at not only the overall meaning, but some important techniques that Dylan Thomas uses just to make sure that we have everything laid out in front of us. So I think certainly that's going to help us out in the process. So first of all, let's talk about Dylan Thomas. So like any novel, play, short story, any of the works that we've covered, it's important to know some background, just like we covered the background of the Lake Poets, and we did the revolutionaries and lived fast, died young, and sort of the melancholy and the ennui, if you will, of your Victorian poets. So I think that's important. Well, Dylan Thomas is Welsh, born in Wales in 1914. So he's certainly a 20th century modernist poet in the fact that he's affected by all the tensions of World War I and how all of that functions. He also began writing at a very early age, so really many of his famous poems were written when he was still a teenager. So this almost prodigy that came up with all of these ideas and all of this great talent. So I think that's kind of important. Now, poems like Before I Knocked would be of great value, or And Death Shall Have No Dominion. Both of those are titles, and I think certainly worthwhile in your understanding. So it also caught the attention. It was so good that it caught the attention of people like T.S. Eliot, who wrote Prufrock. Other authors that necessarily at your phase you wouldn't know. But certainly Tennyson has some influences. T.S. Eliot is absolutely pivotal in the discovery of Dylan Thomas. So we know that Dylan Thomas, like many poets, was blessed with the fact that he was both well known and well acclaimed during his lifetime. Most of these poets that we talk about aren't discovered during their lifetime. We read about them long after they're dead, and their contributions are only studied posthumously. So Dylan Thomas, very differently, was well known, well discovered, absolutely well received. But despite his absolute success, Dylan Thomas himself found it difficult to make a living from poetry alone. Not really a good business to be a writer unless you've been discovered and you're absolutely famous. So I think that's really an interesting idea. So he had to secure funding from wealthy patrons. But he also worked for and recorded pieces for the BBC, the British Broadcasting Company, very early radio. Ultimately, later on in 1942, gets involved in TV, but these things certainly seem important for his personal success. Personally, his life was not all that wonderful. Reminds me a little bit more of our Romantic poets. He suffered from breathing issues. It wasn't tuberculosis, but he had weak lungs. And as a child, this really kind of set him back. Probably why he becomes so intellectual, so emotional in the way that he addresses his material. He's not melancholy like our Romantics were, but certainly there's something about him that I think is really interesting. The breathing problems kept him out of the military in the war, so that probably has a significant impact on the fact that we know him. He didn't like many of the war poets I had you look at, sort of fade into the distance, like Wilfred Owen and a few others that you looked at during Tuesday's class. And I think that's important. So, a lot of interesting stuff. So, that's a little bit of background. Even though he dies young, just like our Romantics, he has a profound effect on where poetry goes. Probably one of the most influential poets of the modern world, and he's certainly one of the most famous Welsh poets. Now, Wales is part of the United Kingdom. But if I asked you on a map to be able to point out where Wales specifically was, many of you would be hard-pressed to correctly identify that. Just one of those things that we're aware of. I'd show you a map, but I don't want to deviate too much from the 7-minute and 2-second mark. So, background. Now, unlike a lot of the poets that we covered, who fit into a poetic movement like the Metaphysicals or the Romantics or Baroque poetry, I think there's all these categories we talk about. And of course, if it isn't Baroque, don't fix it. Dylan Thomas is very difficult to classify. His poetry is distinctly modern, and although he was influenced by the Surrealists, the Salvador Dali, the melting clocks, and that artistic movement of the 20th century, his lyrics and intense emotion that he uses in his work, much more similar to the Romantics that we started at the beginning of this semester. So those two ideas, he's influenced by the Surrealists, like a Salvador Dali, and the Romantics, probably much closer to your Byron, Shelley, and Keats. So that gives you a way to put all of this into perspective. So I think that's really, really kind of an important distinction for Dylan Thomas. Additionally, when we look at Dylan Thomas's work, unlike a lot of other modern poets, he isn't concerned about social issues. He isn't dwelling on making the world better, industrialization, war poetry, those kinds of things. He's very much interested with with the physical processes of life and death. So he really takes these ideas about what happens to us and meditates on loss and meditates on what happens as a result. And he blends the ancient and the modern. So we're going to take a look at a little bit of that as we go. So definitely something that's going to set Dylan Thomas apart from many of the other poets we've looked at. So the poem, Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night, 1951. So this is after the major elements of World War II. So we've jumped quite a bit of time here with this. So it's one of his most famous poems, and in fact might be one of the most famous poems of the 20th century. He composed it, what we have is that he composed it when traveling with his wife and children in Italy in 1947. It was published as part of his 1952 poetry collection. We don't need to know the name of that, but so it's a 1947 poem, but it's not published until the 50s. So certainly going to be influenced by the tumultuous changes and things that were occurring as a result of World War I, then ultimately World War II, as that whole time period became significant. So let's take this poem, 3-line stanza by 3-line stanza. So you look at the premise, and by now we start tackling images and how that ultimately matters. So he says in stanza 1, and you should have your poem in front of you so you can take your notes and you can move forward, which is why I put this poem ultimately in your hand. So he says, do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at the close of day. So as we get old and we face that passage of time, again, that unifying idea of the semester, how time is always knocking at the door, that when old age burns and raves at the close of day, we should rage against the dying of the light. That becomes the mantra. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Something changes. Something goes away. We should not just go and quietly have it happen. No more passivity. No more Prufrock, who says, I can't. I used in one of my junior classes the reference to Bartleby the Scrivener. It's a work by Herman Melville, but Bartleby it's an American work. But Bartleby is another disconnected modernist character. His line is, I would prefer not to. And you can complete that phrase any way you want. I would prefer not to what? Engage in the process. I would prefer not to. I would prefer not to rage against the dying of the light. But what a tremendous idea. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Then it goes on. Although wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning. Even though at the end of our lives we know that death has to come. There's an embracing of this. Because their words forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. What an interesting idea. They don't embrace death because they have never truly lived. They have never forked lightning with their words. They have never sparked attention. They have never grabbed the consciousness of someone and said, hey, this is incredibly important. I think, again, that is huge. Because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Because I didn't make an impact, I'm not ready to go. Because I haven't impressed anyone with my existence, it's not time for me. If you remember in class, I keep floating this idea for the final. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. How is all literature an attempt to explain the human reaction to death? How is it about raging against the dying of the light? Is it because these authors have forked no lightning, that they're raging, that they're saying, I don't want to do this? I'm not sure. Then it goes on, gentle men, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Good men who have never achieved anything, who have never, to use the term from the first or second week of school, self-actualized. They're the ones that rage against the dying of the light, whose frail deeds might have danced in a green bay, but didn't. People that could have been extraordinary, but didn't try. I think, again, that is so significantly important. They rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang in the sun, wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late. They grieved it on its way. They do not go gentle into the good night. Wild men who caught and sang the sun, the passage of time, who celebrated the passing of time. Those that live their life, that carpe their diem, but learned too late why it's important. They do not go gentle. They rage against the dying of the night, of the light. So again, interesting idea. We may know it, but if we don't go out and do anything with it, again, that's the top of your pyramid. Sorry, I made the lame triangle. This is the top of your pyramid. Those men who do not self-actualize, they rage against the dying of the light. No, I'm not ready. I haven't lived. I need more time. More time. This is Macbeth's tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. I need more time because I ruined and wasted my life. This is going to be your Mariner. This is going to be several of those poems you've already looked at. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. They rage against the dying of the light. Grave men, serious men, or men just at the end of their lives, who see with glaring truth what everybody else can't see because they're too busy living their life. They rage against the dying of the light. I keep wanting to say dying of the night. It's kind of a similar idea, but again, I'm straying from the point just a little bit. Grave men near death who see with blinding sight. That's your paradox. Blinding sight. We can't see, yet we're aware. We're blind, yet we can see. And again, it's not a physical vision that we're talking about. How is this Macbeth? How is this blind characters that we see all throughout literature? How is this characters, or how are these characters that we've really been surrounded by the entire semester? The truth is right in front of us, but we choose ultimately not to see it because it's too difficult. So there's a lot of density. I'm already at 17 minutes, and I've still got a way to go. So all these ideas, what causes us to rise up and rage against the dying of the light? So I think those are going to be some hugely significant kinds of things. And again, I'm just looking at my desk and some of the issues and some of my Diego Rivera and some of those things that I have in front of me. Put it there so you can see it better. Again, these are important. And then it says, and I think this last 4 lines is absolutely what the poem is about. So all of this reflection about men who make these sacrifices and those that rage against death and the wasted life and these kinds of things, it all boils down to this sort of singular concept here at 18 minutes and 14 seconds. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. And you, there on that sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. That's moving. All the research says that Dylan Thomas wrote this poem to his dying father. And if you've ever been in this situation, suffered great loss, this is grounding. This makes some sense. Curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Give me the burden of the pain, but then bless me with the experience. Bless me with that overall moment and why that matters. And you just heard my daughter out in the hallway. It says, "Now bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Do not go quietly. Do not give up the fight, give up the life, even though we believe inherently with faith and all these things that it's going to be better. Do not go gentle into that good night. Instead, rage. Rage against the dying of the light and stand and grasp every single moment before it slips away. Carpe your diem. And I think extraordinarily that's an important concept as we move and look forward to the rest of what's occurring with all of this. So I think this is going to be an important task for us as we move forward. The companion lesson to this is a modernist piece of prose called Sunrise on the Veld. When you read Sunrise on the Veld, it is I keep thinking it's Newfoundland, but it's one of those far off British territories. It's the story of a young man going out to run in the Veld. The Veld are vast tracts of prairie. And the first 5 or 6 paragraphs are descriptive. It's the cool morning. It's the way the cold ground feels on his bare feet as he springs up before dawn to go out and hunt. And as he's progressing through these different moments and sort of experiencing the light after he's dragged himself out of bed, even though he's laying there, springs wide awake at I think 4:30 in the morning. He's taught his body is primed to go out and experience. For years, I've used the Walt Whitman term. This is his barbaric yawp. He goes outside, and you'll see in the story that he absolutely screams to the universe, cries out to the universe his youth, his energy, his power. That's juxtaposed with the end of the story. So that barbaric yawp is absolutely juxtaposed with what occurs in the final 2 or 3 paragraphs of the story when he witnesses death. And so again, I'm thinking that this is going to be extraordinarily important for you as you move forward. So as we're looking towards Thursday of next week, do not go gentle into that good night. And Sunrise on the Veld are your last 2 pieces. 1 poem, 1 short piece of prose. So you want to examine how both of those works. One we've covered here, and the second I'm going to need you to read in preparation for next week's final. You need to make sure that as you put these pieces together, you're looking for a similarity in tone. This awareness of human existence, specifically the modernist view of what life means to human beings, how we address all of these particulars as we move forward. So again, I think all of this is going to be extraordinarily important for us as we go. So the first piece of what we've done is you've got hopefully at least a couple pages of notes. Maybe you wrote on your poem itself. So what I want you to do now is, just like we've done before, I want you to take a photocopy of those notes and send them to me. Now, it is 6:40 on, what is today? On the 25th, Wednesday. Somehow I lost track of my days there. And I'm still chasing guys who didn't send their notes and do what I asked them to do today, even though I was sitting in my office and communicating with many of you during that particular lesson. So you're watching it, I'm saying, this is what I want you to do, pay attention. Exactly. So if you didn't send me those notes, I've gone in and I've given you a 0. Okay? There were a couple that I corrected when I got back home this evening before I sat and did this, but still. So if you didn't send your notes from today's material, you need to send those to me. Think about giving you half credit for it. The next thing I want you to work on is I want you to take the notes from Dylan Thomas, and I want you to send those to me as well. But before you send me your notes, I want you to write me a half-a-page reflection on how this resonates with you. What grabbed your attention about do not go gentle into this good night, into that good night, sorry. I want you to reflect for me on what that means to you. Getting to some of these personal ideas. Because I think, again, this is going to provide us with a fairly significant piece of focus as we move into the end of your junior year and then moving into your senior year. So I think absolutely. The last little bit of information, the things that I have, is these are period 8 final tests. So these are Victorian tests. I'm going to get these done. I'm just trying to get through all these stacks of information I have on my desk. I also have about 14 more research papers to go. As I'm putting the grades in, some of you need to meet with me because I used your rubric the way that I told you I was going to use it, and I went through and I made sure I had everything quantified and taken care of. However, from home, I can't do a whole lot about it other than we can trade emails and we can speak about it that way. So you need to make sure you review. You will have all of those papers in your hand. If I can't put them in your hand, I had no problem coming over here and scanning the material so that you have it that way. And then the rest of the material in my office that I just sit and I work with. As a matter of fact, just for the fun of this here, I follow a Detroit artist. He's a photographer. And that's a picture of the downtown at the train station, and that's the building that Ford Motor bought and is working to refurbish. But the painting is called Looking Back on Detroit. So if you saw in the corner, there is a rear view mirror with pictures of the RenCen in the background. So, of course, a lot of this detail is to see if you're paying attention and if you're kind of grabbing all this as you go. It would not be shocking to me if I put that on your final exam as a little bit of bonus to incentivize you to make sure that you are paying attention. Okay? Makes it fun. All right, I'm at 27 minutes and 36 seconds. You have a terrific rest of your day.